Conservatively, we've got at least 200 crash retrieval cases.
Out of public view lie whispered accounts of UFO crash retrievals, incidents shrouded in secrecy, where unidentified flying objects have reportedly fallen from the sky, only to be swiftly concealed by covert agencies, leaving behind questions and speculation. What truths lie buried beneath these clandestine recoveries, and what lengths are taken to keep them hidden from the eyes of the world?
What you see outside in this world, when you look out your living room window, is a construct. It's not the real world. There's a small group that's controlling this information, the power elite, you could call it, the cabal, if you want to call it, a transnational team keeping this under wraps. We could change the world, and it's going to take getting these cases declassified and getting to the hardware. That's what it's going to take. The phenomenon is real, not fictitious or imaginary. They are perhaps 100 years beyond what you could even dream of. We need to get that technology to save our own planet. The reason why I believe that these crash retrieval cases are correct is because I've got independent confirmation from other sources. This subject of UFO crash retrievals is no longer classified. What it is, it's proprietary. You can see the narrative on UFOs is always being pushed toward the crash retrievals. My name is Michael Schratt. I'm a private pilot, a military aerospace historian. Basically, the primary focus of my research deals with classified aircraft within the military-industrial complex. These are the aircraft that have no congressional oversight, no public scrutiny. The funding comes from black budget projects, unacknowledged special access programs. If you work in one of those projects and the president asks you for specific details regarding that program, your mandatory reply is to be, Mr. President, no such project exists. Started tracking classified aircraft programs, started interviewing people who work for the defense contractors, started looking at the historical UFO cases, being about an hour from 2457 West Peterson Avenue in downtown Chicago, where they have CUFOS, Center for UFO Studies.
The Center for UFO Studies, CUFOS, is a dedicated research organization founded by astronomer Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Focused on the scientific investigation of unidentified flying objects, CUFOS analyzes UFO sightings and encounters to better understand the phenomenon. With rigorous research and objective analysis, the organization seeks to uncover factual information hidden behind the mystery of UFOs.
At that time, they had the largest private collection of UFO files in the United States. And it was an underused library. I mean, no one cared about it. It was just completely unused. It was empty. But Mark Rodiger gave me free rein to the whole place. I looked through every single file, multiple file cabinets, just packed totally full of manila folders of cases that were sent into J. Allen Hynek. He passed away in '86, but he had people from all around the world sending him sighting reports, drawings, sketches of what the craft looked like. And it was a treasure trove of information. And the goal is to preserve an important part of our national history and then use that as a guide to commission full color renderings to make these cases come alive. And so that's really been what I've been doing the last 25 years, almost 30 years. And then more recently, diving into the Leonard Stringfield crash retrieval cases, where I feel that this is the most important thing that we can all be doing.
In the field of UFO crash retrieval, one man pioneered the study of crash retrieval cases. His work focused on uncovering evidence of downed unidentified flying objects and alleged secret government recoveries. Through thorough documentation and persistent investigation, he significantly influenced UFO research, bringing a new level of scrutiny to reports of alien technology and encounters. This man, known as the father of UFO crash retrieval investigations, is Leonard Stringfield.
Bottom line is, Leonard Stringfield is the gentleman who coined the term UFO crash retrievals. Over a 30-year time period, he had collected dozens upon dozens of first-hand accounts from military personnel who had been involved in the crash retrievals, who had loaded these things up on tractor trailers, who shipped them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, who dealt with the autopsies, who read the pathologist report. People like scientists and radar technicians, people like x-ray technicians who actually took x-rays of these things, and then all the bodies and autopsies were sent to Walter Reed Army Medical Center next to Washington, D.C. That's the caliber of witnesses that Leonard had compiled. So what he did is he took all the reports, put them in one binder, because they used to be 7 separate status reports, and they were spread out, and they were not easy to get. So you might be able to get status report and 3 and status report number 5, but you'd be missing all the other ones. Well, somebody came up with a great idea to publish them in one volume, and so now they're all here, and it's drilling down and getting you into the intricate details of how many bodies were found and where the craft were shipped and what would it look like on the inside of the craft. That's what this book talks about. Let's go over a couple of these cases. This is 1942, and this is a crash retrieval case from Leonard Stringfield. All of these are documented. They all have a spec sheet. So this is 1942 at an Army base in north of Georgia that even Leonard didn't even know where it was. So he didn't even know the exact location. Now, when this thing came down, this is about 15 feet in diameter, 10 feet high. It caused a hull breach on the side of the craft. There were 3 levels on this craft. Upper level, which you see here on the blow-up, had 4, essentially a control panel with buttons and switches. That was level number 1. Below that, there was a wraparound window with what looked like 4 bar stools. That was level number 2. Level number 3 was a hatch entryway that they were able to gain entry into the craft itself. Now, there were 4 bodies taken alive, about 4 feet tall. That's what you see on the left here. Oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose, emaciated body parts, hands that went down below the knees. They eventually died later. And then I also want to point out that written along the bottom circumference of the craft itself were these hieroglyphic type lettering. And so I'm thinking there's got to be an international coalition of engineers, linguistic experts who are looking at this information, trying to decipher what the codes are, what the symbols mean. There has to be, because there's at least 10 other cases within the Stringfield collection that talk about these writings. Okay, so I thought we'd move on to the next case here. It's essentially cases where you've got eyewitness testimony, you've got sketches, you've got original people who worked on these type vehicles. This is 1946. This is before Roswell. Now, this was a private in records management, and he was told to deliver a letter to a high-level military brass at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He had a friend who was an MP, so he's going into this hangar, and his MP friend says, "Hey, I got something I want to show you." So he brings him to the back of the hangar, and what they see is about a 15-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It's about 7 feet tall, highly polished mirror reflective exterior. No rivets, no seams, no welds, no socket head cap screws, no hex head cap screws, no visible means of propulsion. There was a series of rectangular windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. It came in from a railroad car from Arkansas. This is back in 1946. Was shipped to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. It had not become Wright-Patterson Air Force Base until 1947. It was still known as Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. Now, I've peeled back the skin so that you can see this 3-foot diameter central column that went from the bottom of the craft up through the midpoint and then terminating at the top section. I also want to bring your attention to this section right here where there was a red dot. He said that there were white lab coat technicians that were desperately trying to breach the hull of this craft with diamond tip drill bits, and they couldn't get in. So this is back in 1946. And this is Rudy's drawing, which you can see right here. So again, you've got the disc-shaped craft here. You've got a tarp over on the right-hand side. You've got the toolbox with the diamond tip drill bit, the electric drill. So that is vintage 1946. So I had my friend Joseph Wraith do the full color rendering, and this is what we came up with if we were back there back in 1946. And that's what this whole crusade is about, taking this eyewitness testimony, digging out these old dusty reports that are 60 years old, 70 years old, and committing these to good full color renderings. So this is 1946, Berkeley University. Primary eyewitness was a metallurgical engineer. So he's got this white lab coat, he's got a clipboard, and this 18-wheeler tractor trailer lowboy backs into the warehouse at Berkeley, and he's standing there. This is what you can see here. And what he saw was a 30-foot long egg-shaped craft. It had a hull breach on the side of it, looked like a cracked egg. There was a central core, you could call it, or yoke, that was about 3 feet in diameter. On the forward section of this craft was a composite panel. There was another composite panel that wrapped around the outer circumference of this central core. He also mentioned that there was a hull breach on the side of the craft, and this is again according to Leonard Stringfield. We have his testimony. So what we wanted to do next is commit this to a full color rendering, again 1947, Berkeley University, and this is what we came up with. So it's really not a lack of evidence. What the problem we're running into is, for congressional hearings, senators and congressmen, number one, have not been read into these programs. Number two, they don't have a high enough security clearance to get access to this information. So how can they declassify something that they don't have access to? That's the problem we're running into, the senators and congressmen who are supposed to have a need to know on this, but they don't. This is late 1948. This is Sierra Madre Mountain Range, Mexico. Primary eyewitness was a highway construction engineer. He was asked to assist the United States military on a crash retrieval, and we know the diameter of this craft. How do we know this? Simple. You take an inside dimension on the aft cargo bay of the C-119, which is about 9 feet 10 inches. So by default, you need 5 inches of clearance on either side so that this thing can slip in there. So it's about 9 feet in diameter, and he assisted the U.S. military. Here you can see them with the clamshell doors open, bringing this craft up into the back of the C-119. And so we went ahead and did a full color rendering. This is what the craft looks like as they're bringing it into the back end of the C-119. We'll do a little bit of a blow up here. This gives you a little bit better idea of what the craft actually looks like. Now, within the report that Stringfield has, he said that there were at least 3 ET bodies recovered. They were tiny. They have to be. How are you going to fit bodies into a 9-foot diameter disc-shaped craft that's like this section right here? He said that when he went up to the bodies that were burned, he touched their faces and their skin came off on his fingers. And so this is what the bodies look like according to the primary eyewitness. And we have his testimony in this report here. And that's what this entire book is about, firsthand military witnesses who've actually seen the bodies. 1952, at the Pentagon. This is an office worker. She's told to go down to the basement at the Pentagon. There is a basement in the Pentagon. They've got a lot of classified material there. I know this because there's a newspaper clipping that specifically talks about how Dick Cheney, who was the vice president under George Bush II, actually got lost in the basement. So there's no debating that there is a basement there. So this office worker, 1952 at the Pentagon, she's told to go into this room. So she goes into this room, she kind of goes through these double doors, and it's this dark, dingy room. There's some cardboard boxes off to the left. It's, it's not well lit. So when she gets in there, she kind of does this 180 turn. What does she see? A pickled alien in a glass jar, believe it or not. We've got the Stringfield report, and she's shocked about what she's seeing. Within 5 seconds, she feels this hand on her arm. It's an MP telling her to get out of here immediately. You're not supposed to be in here. So we do have her testimony on file. So a very good case. And here's the thing. Why would these people be lying to us? There's 119 crash retrieval cases within the Stringfield collection. Are a couple of these people dishonest? Sure, absolutely. You can take out 3, 4, 5, or 6. But when you take these as a united coalition as a whole, you can't just discount all of them, because the caliber of these witnesses is nothing short of incredible. 1953, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. You've got a 4-engine DC-7 cargo aircraft that taxis up to the tarmac. I believe this took place at hangar complex number 4. The last complex is Bay E, which is the 5th one off to the right. I've actually been in that hangar. I believe it took place in that hangar. We've got this warrant officer who's at the right place at the right time when this DC-7 taxis up onto the tarmac. Hangar doors open. This is all at night. This DC-7 taxis in, and then there's a cargo bay door on the port side of the aircraft, which is on the left-hand side. Cargo bay door opens up, and then there's this forklift that starts offloading these pallets. On the top of these pallets are 3 wooden crates with their lids pulled off. And he's only about 10 feet away, so he's kind of looking over and looking in. And what does he see? He sees 3 ET bodies, about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, all wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. They had oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose. He said one was female because it had breasts, quote-unquote breasts. And then he said that all of them were being suspended off the bottom of the wooden crates by this white netting to protect it from the dry ice freezer burn below. I mean, incredible story, but we've got his account. So what we wanted to do is do a full color rendering of his cases. This is what we came up with if we were there back at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base back in 1953. Another Stringfield case that is very important, I felt. This is December 1963. Literally a couple of weeks after Kennedy was assassinated at Daley Plaza, November 22nd, 1963. The primary eyewitness was a Marine. So he's called to board a plane with blacked out windows. They fly about 3 hours from Cherry Point, North Carolina, which is a Marine base. And when they land, they get to this building. It has 2 big doors. The doors open up. When he looks inside, he sees this craft. It's about 40 feet in diameter, about 15 feet tall. It looks like a fat hamburger. It has a polished mirror aluminum chrome exterior, no visible means of propulsion. There was no welds, there's no seams, no socket head cap screws, no fasteners of any kind. He said it had 9 elliptically shaped opaque windows wrapped around the outer circumference. He also said that there was a absolutely slight hint of an entryway hatch on the bottom of the craft that you could not put a razor blade in because the seams was so perfectly integrated in there. And then he said that there were lab coat technicians with diamond tip drill bits trying to breach the hull of this craft, and they couldn't do it. So this was kind of like the first pass drawing. And then he said that the whole thing was being propped up on scaffolding. So you could walk under this thing, you could walk around this thing. They built a catwalk on this. Each lab coat technician had a color-coded badge. So if you had a yellow badge, you could access this part of the facility. If you had a green badge, you could access this part of the craft. If you had a red badge, you had full access to the entire facility. Now, directly below this craft, painted on the floor, was a white circle. And his job was to be there for 2 weeks to guard this craft. He was told to shoot to kill anyone who would try to breach that white circle. So that was his assignment there. This is the full color rendering we came up with. It gives you an idea of what this craft actually looks like. So we have these lab coat technicians here. This was our first full color rendering of this craft itself. Now, once they failed with the diamond tip drill bits, they went to a second attempt, which was acetylene torches. That failed. Their third attempt was to bring in these 2 what looked like tractor trailers, very long van-like tractor trailers that had 2 electrical generating devices on them. They were stringing these cables, heavy gauge cables, into the facility. They connected a laser to this device, turned the laser onto the craft. It reflected, bounced off, and damaged the ceiling tile within the facility. So when they moved the laser away, it was warm to the touch, had no effect whatsoever. So what I want to do now is I want to take you through a very brief tour of this facility. So here we are at the chain link fence, and we're going to kind of breach this chain link fence like we're a fly on the wall here. And now we're through the chain link fence. We're getting a little bit closer here. This is a 45-degree look-down angle of the scene. He said that the whole place was excruciatingly well lit. And I interviewed the gentleman who interviewed the primary eyewitness, this was done back in 1986. I have his name. I did a videotape interview with the gentleman who interviewed the Marine. I was fortunate enough to secure some original sketches from the Marine, and he gave me his original notes. Now, the last day he was there, he said that this craft was being taken off its scaffolding, put onto a tractor trailer, and then covered by a tarp and move it to the next location. So one way that they keep this information classified is, number one, they compartmentalize this information and they move these assets from location to location, to base, so that no one person has a total clue on what's going on here. Now, back to this case. He was told to guard this craft for 2 weeks. And there was one point where no one frisked him. He was alone with the craft. He was successful in bringing a small German Minox camera into this facility, and he snapped a photograph of this thing. However, that photograph was lost in a flood back in 1983. So we were this close to getting an actual photograph, but that was lost in 1983. So this is just another example of a first-hand military witness that actually guarded one of these back in December 1963. What is actually being talked about from these first-hand military witnesses? Now, I want to give you an example of what the doctors, the medical personnel who were on these retrieval teams, when bodies were recovered, what did these bodies look like? So let me give you some bullet items from the actual pathologist report, people who were on the autopsies. I'm not going to run through all these, but here's what they say. This is first-hand military sources here. Approximately 3.5 to 4.5 feet tall, oversized head, oversized eyes, approximately 40 pounds in weight, 2 round eyes with pupils under heavy brow ridge, and many times the eyes wrap around to halfway back toward the ears, quote unquote ears. Oriental looking. The head by human standards is large when compared to the size of the torso. No earlobes or protrusion flesh extending beyond apertures. Nose is vague. Arms going down below the knees. A slit for a mouth, minute nose, no lips. Neck described as being thin, in some instances not being visible, but a garment wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. So that's what the pathologist reports are telling us. So I thought we need to do a drawing of what these look like based on the medical examiner's report. And it's kind of a world exclusive. This is what we came up with. These are what these beings look like to the best of our ability based on the pathologist's report. So you've got 3.5 feet tall. You've got emaciated body figures here. You've got arms that go down below the knees. You've got an oversized head. You've got almond wraparound shaped eyes. You've got a very slit for a mouth. You've got a minute nose. You've got, in many cases, there was webbing between the fingers, and that's what you show right here. So this is based on the medical autopsy reports. 1974. This is a woman who was a new hire, and she was going to be working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. She went to a dinner party. Her new boss is there. Off to the right, there's a small group talking about, of all things, UFOs, because the subject of UFOs came up for some reason, as it always does. So she's involved in this conversation here. And her new boss could kind of sense that she's getting beaten up here because they're talking about UFOs. She's getting ridiculed. He could sense that she's really getting beaten up. So he turns to her and he says, "Would you like to see the physical evidence?" She came back and said, "Now?" "Yes, now." So he takes her in his car. They drive from the dinner party at night to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now, this guy had the correct security clearances. He had a key card. So he walked down this corridor. There was a retinal scanner. He looked inside there. It scanned his pupils. And then he pulled out his key card, put that into the key reader. A door opened up. They walked down another corridor. Now there was another retinal scanner, so this is double redundancy. You couldn't just get in here. You had to have the correct security clearances. So he put and insert his card into the reader. It cleared him. Doors open up. They walk into an underground morgue at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So you can kind of get the picture here. It's well lit. There's medical material. There's some, call them metal trays and dollies. Off to the left, there's a whole bunch of these cabinets with the handles on them. And when you open up one of these cabinets, these roller trays come out. And sitting on one of these roller trays is an ET corpse, half covered in a body bag. And she's basically standing right over this thing, looking at this thing. And this thing is zipped up about up to its mid-chest. And she can't believe what she's seeing. So here's our drawing that shows you what this looked like. And it is shattering her reality. She can't believe this. Now, she had her own religious beliefs and everything, but when she saw the actual evidence that he was talking about, she was shocked to her core. So you could kind of see why they're keeping this under wraps, because there will be a cross-section of society, conservatively speaking, that some people will not be able to handle this reality. So you could make an argument that early on, this is why the cover-up continued. However, when she reported to work after the 2 weeks, because she gave her 2-week notice, when she reported to her new job, she was told by the office manager that her supervisor passed away. They have no recollection where he went, and there was no references in the local obituary. This guy completely disappeared off the radar screen. He might have been disappeared. So that's how this went down. So we wanted to take the original sketch from Rudy, and I want to kind of give you a real exclusive here. Here is our primary eyewitness looking at the body inside the underground morgue back in 1974 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So the other reasons for the cover-up are clearly the weapons advancement and the energy systems associated with these propulsion systems, because if you could reverse engineer the propulsion systems associated with these vehicles, you would doom the utilities, the multi-trillion-dollar utilities. So your internal combustion engines would go obsolete overnight. So you'd take out GM, you'd take out Ford. So all the cars would be obsolete. You would take out the nuclear power plants. You would take out the solar farms. You would take out the wind generators. All of these things, the coal fire plants, all of these things would be obsolete overnight. It would cost trillions of dollars. All the profits would evaporate overnight. So that is the primary reason for the cover-ups. The reason why I believe that generally these crash retrieval cases are correct is because I've got independent confirmation from other sources that are confirming details of the craft, like the diamond tip drill bits. I've got 3 cases of this diamond tip drill bit. You were talking about the black triangles. Well, that checks out because we've got multiple eyewitnesses in the Belgium Triangle case. This is 8990. We've got the Southern Illinois Triangle. This is January 5th, 2000. We've got the Hudson Valley Boomerang cases between 83 to 89, where witnesses below these triangles, when they look up, first thing they see is tubes, pipes, and cylinders. Then they hear this low-frequency electrical humming noise, like a transformer or a sewing machine. A lot of these craft are tested on Thursday nights. That's another evidence that it's a black budget man-made program. Why are Thursday nights important? Simple, because Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is pre-flight. Thursday's the test flight. Friday's debrief, Saturday, Sunday, there's no one there. So when you hear about a classified thing going on and you hear it's a UFO report and it's on a Thursday, you can almost bet your bottom dollar that it's one of ours. And personally, I believe 95% of what people are reporting as extraterrestrial UFOs are in point of fact our own deep black programs. There is a 5% core of reality to this because these cases go back to Columbus. The Romans had shields flying. We didn't have any defense contractors back then. So this whole phenomenon is a multi-headed hydra. But what they're doing is, and these guys are good. The CIA, the NSA, these guys are good. They're professionals. What they want to do is take their own deep black aerospace programs and paint it with the UFO brush to hide their own black budget programs. And that's what they've done. That's what they've done. And they've brought in muddy the waters. They brought in censorship with the media. They're over here with the giggle factor. And you bring that all together. And that's why we're 80 years into this and we still don't know what's going on. But deep within the secret underground, deep underground military bases, they're doing this on a daily basis. In fact, during the Clinton administration, we were spending $100 million a day on black programs. Yeah, that's always been probably the big $64 million question. If these ET races are so advanced, so technologically advanced, they could be 100 light years away, why are they crashing when they get here? They should be having no problem whatsoever. They made it through gravity wells, they made it through quirks, they made it through different galaxies, and then when they come to our atmosphere, they crash. It doesn't make any sense. And I agree, it doesn't make any sense. But when you start drilling down into what's actually happening here, it starts to make sense. For example, we don't have reports of 1,000-foot-long motherships crashing. We've got scout ship reports of crash. So that's the first thing we want to consider. Next thing we want to consider is that what appears to be happening, and this is backed up by, I did a whole presentation about this, is that there is, in point of fact, a rogue group within the military-industrial complex that is targeting, tracking, and shooting these things down for their propulsion system assets and their weapons system advancement technology. It's been going on. And we know this because Nikola Tesla talked about in the 1930s, and long prior to, his quote-unquote death ray, where he was using scalar weaponry, directed energy weapons, and he could take down an entire fleet, 300 aircraft in one shot. And what they've done is they have perfected that technology. They've piggybacked that technology on pre-existing radars, and they're shooting these things down and exploiting the technology. Now, this is confirmed by Harry Drew, who's no longer with us. Harry Drew was the premier researcher on the Kingman, not crash retrieval, but the Kingman soft landing. And he said that they had triangulated a very high power radar range. They turned up the intensity on this radar range, and then when birds flew right through this radar range, they immediately dropped on the ground. They were dead. So this is like very high intensity. So when there was a corridor, when these ET craft flew through there, somehow it interacted with their navigation system, and there was this falling leaf phenomenon, and they did a soft landing. So this somewhat explains why these things are actually crashing.
The history of UFO crash retrieval traces back to numerous reported incidents where unidentified flying objects were alleged to have crash landed on Earth, prompting covert recovery operations. The most famous of these incidents occurred in 1947 near Roswell, New Mexico. Witnesses reported finding debris unlike any known aircraft strewn across the desert landscape. This incident quickly escalated as military forces moved in, securing the area and gathering the mysterious materials. Initial reports from the local Air Force base shocked the world, claiming a flying disc had been recovered. However, the story was soon retracted, leading to widespread speculation and accusations of a cover-up. Beyond the debris, there were also persistent claims that alien bodies were recovered and whisked away for secret military studies, possibly to harness advanced extraterrestrial technology. The government's shifting explanations only fueled the mystery.
What we're talking about here is essentially July 2nd into the morning of July 3rd, 1947. It's not one event, it's actually, in point of fact, 5 events. So we're going to start here north of the debris field at something called the touchdown site. So when this craft came in, it originally touched down. This is 5 nautical miles north of the debris field, where Lincoln La Paz, who was a meteorite expert, and Louis Rickett, who's 509th Bomb Group member, what they discovered is fused green glass. So something came down indicative of high heat, fused the sand to glass, skipped up, and then blew up in midair over the Foster Ranch. And that's where you see all this raining debris that came down. So right off the bat, we can take the weather balloon theory and wipe it off, because a weather balloon is not going to fuse sand into green glass. You need very high heat to do that. According to Witness to Roswell by Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, there were 2 teams of military personnel that went down on hands and knees and crisscrossed the debris field for 3 days, and then finished up with industrial vacuum cleaners to make sure they got every shred of debris that came down. Now, why would you do that for a weather balloon? Doesn't make any sense. And then you look at the human aspect of this. Frankie Rowe's father was a fireman at the time, and she was coming home from a dental appointment. This is just a few days after this actually happened. And there was a police officer at the fire department, at the fire station, and he had some of the debris. He was showing it to Frankie's father. Later that evening, military police got to their house and said, "You are never to talk about this, and if we do, they'll be finding your bones out in the desert." They threatened her to the unbelievable degree. There were people that came to civilians' houses. They pulled up floorboards. They took wheat sacks and put knives in them. They were looking for any shred of evidence over a weather balloon. So this just gives more evidence that we're not talking about a weather balloon here. We're not talking about a Project Mogul balloon here. So many pieces of evidence that indicate that there's something much more going on. And this is just one case. So 5 nautical miles south of the touchdown site is the debris field, where we have rancher Mac Brazel and 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor. What they discovered was essentially 3 types of debris. Number 1 type debris was this very thin metallic aluminum material that could not be cut, could not be burned, could not be dented with a 16-pound sledgehammer. Second type debris was this quote-unquote memory metal, the Holy Grail memory metal, where you could essentially fold this up or crinkle this up in your hand, and when you let go, it spread out like liquid mercury and slowly settled down to the floor. That's debris number 2. Debris number 3 is various length of I-beams, which were about 3/8 of an inch wide, a little bit larger than a 1/2 inch in length, and then about 11 inches in total length. Those were spread out within the debris field as well. Now, the trajectory of the craft was from the northwest to the southeast, and that's what you see with this arrow here leading to the crash site. As the escape pod was heading southeastbound, because the main craft had already exploded, what was recovered was an escape pod. There were 2 bodies that ejected from the craft about 2.5 miles east of the debris field. That's the second body site, known as the D. Proctor site. The craft actually came down about 35 to 40 miles north of downtown Roswell. There were 5 bodies recovered, 1 was still alive, but the other 2 bodies were already ejected here. This was what was known as the actual crash site. Now, what does it look like? It's remote by car, but it's not remote by plane. So if this is one of ours, whatever was out there was sitting out there in the desert for the night of the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and the evening of the 7th. So you can see that the biologics were starting to decompose, and that's checked out by the 509th Bomb Group members, that when they got near the bodies, the pungent odor of decomposing bodies permeated their military uniforms, and their wives said that they had to burn their husbands' clothes because they couldn't get that out of their other things. The actual craft itself was an egg-shaped craft with a low-rise dome. It was 13 feet across, the size of a Volkswagen. This is not a big craft. You can see the 2 ET bodies that were already dead and deceased. The last one was the survivor. According to Don Schmidt and Tom Curry, this whole operation took place within about 100 yards of a windmill and a water tank. Now, how do you load this thing up? They did not have a crane at 509th Bomb Group. They had to bring in an independent contractor from downtown Roswell that drove all the way up to the crash site in a crane type device. And this is what it looked like when they loaded the craft up. They had a lanyard, they brought it onto this type trailer. That trailer went through downtown Roswell. Now, what did it look on the inside? We have one report from a 509th Bomb Group member named Bud Taylor. He was at the crash site. He looked inside the craft because there was a hull breach on the side of the craft. And what he said he saw were, number 1, it looked like this thing had like fibers going through it, indicative of fiber optics. He also said that there were hieroglyphic letters on the inside of the craft itself. And then he said that there were flat screen monitors inside there as well. So we did a rendering, and this is what we came up with as far as the first-hand military witness on the inside of the craft itself. Now, we've got the craft loaded up on the 18-wheeler tractor trailer. We're 40 miles north of Roswell. We're going to go down Main Street and make our way to Hangar 84, which is where they actually took the craft. So here's the convoy. We've got the Jeeps up front. There were 2 paper boys that saw this. There were multiple civilian witnesses that saw this convoy of vehicle go down Main Street. This has been confirmed. It's never been contested. And you can take this same route today. You can rent a car, go to Roswell, and follow the exact same route this convoy did. I mean, all these streets are still there. This was about you could call it 9-foot long, approximately 13-foot long craft. It looked like an egg. It was covered by a tarp. It had chains on it. So this was seen by multiple eyewitnesses. This is Hangar P3, Building 84, Roswell Army Airfield. So we've got the ambulance truck. We've got the 18-wheeler tractor trailer. We've got the child-sized caskets that were confirmed by Glenn Dennis, who was the mortician at the time. And while all this is going on, in the background, they're building a wooden crate. So what they did is, once they put the bodies into the caskets, they loaded the caskets into the wooden crate. That crate was loaded into what's known as atomic bomb pit number 1. And that's what you see right here. This is atomic bomb pit number 1, usually used for atomic bombs, but this time they had a wooden crate in there. And it's interesting, they had military police with rifles stationed inside and out of these concentric circles with orders to shoot to kill anyone who would try to breach these perimeter screens. And this is all over a weather balloon. Now, the guards that were guarding this wooden crate were almost sick to the point of throwing up because of that stench coming from the bodies, and they could not get that out of their uniform. So this is confirmed by multiple 509th Bomb Group members. So what we want to do now is we'll take the B-29 known as Straight Flush that taxied over atomic bomb pit number 1. There's a hydraulic lift that lifted the crate into the bomb bay of atomic bomb pit number 1, and this flew directly to 8th Air Force Headquarters, Fort Worth, Texas. We had a C-54 that was flown by Pappy Henderson. He flew directly to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. At this point, we believe that there was an autopsy of at least one body, kind of a rudimentary autopsy taking place inside the hangar at 509th Bomb Group, and later the body was sent to the Aeromedical Lab sometime after July 9th, 1947. So in a nutshell, that's Roswell.
2023 and 2024 mark significant moments in the official U.S. government discourse regarding UFOs, now known as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. The hearings gathered lawmakers, military officials, and experts to systematically address numerous reports of unexplained aerial sightings. Adding to the momentum is David Grush, who has been instrumental in broadening the discourse around this. Grush, a researcher and advocate for increased transparency in UAP investigations, his work emphasizes the importance of a multidisciplinary approach, bridging the gap between scientific inquiry and national security concerns, ensuring that UAPs are now recognized not just as anomalies, but as crucial subjects for investigation and understanding in the broader scientific community.
All I would say about those hearings is what David Grush is telling you is secondhand testimony. He had no firsthand dealings with retrieved bodies or craft. He's only talking about what others had told him. What Leonard that's what makes his witnesses unique, is that these are firsthand military witnesses that actually held the bodies, who loaded these craft onto 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboys and shipped them to Wright-Patterson Air Force. During the 40s and 50s, into the 60s, early part of the 70s, all roads led to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's simple. The reason why is they had the aeromedical lab there, so they could test the quote-unquote biologicals. They had the foreign technology division there, so they could test the tensile strength of these craft. So it makes sense that these craft were shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In fact, there is an alleged location, which I don't even think it's alleged at this point, called the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Most likely an underground facility there. Former presidential candidate Barry Goldwater tried to get access to the Blue Room because he had a UFO interest for decades. So he turned to his old good friend Curtis LeMay and said, "General, I hear you have a room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where you keep all this stuff, all the bodies and the material. Can I go in there? General turns to Barry Goldwater and says, damn it, Barry, don't you ever ask me that question again, because if you do, I'll have you court-martialed because I can't even get in there. So if this wasn't real, why would Curtis LeMay call out his friend Barry Goldwater? So there is a blue room. It may not be called the blue room now, but there is a facility absolutely at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I also know from Marion Black Mac Magruder, I've got his testimony from his son, basically stating that the bodies, some of the bodies were shipped to Eglin Air Force Base in underground cold storage vaults there. So you're talking about evidence, there's your evidence. If you could get access to that facility, an underground cold storage vault at Eglin Air Force Base, you'd see the bodies. If we're gonna have another series of congressional hearings and we don't have any hardware, no physical evidence to back any of this up, we're not gonna get anywhere, because we're just gonna be spinning our wheels. We've already tried the democratic process with this and it's failed us. So what we need to do now is track down these legacy crash retrieval witnesses, get to their bosses that could lead us to the facilities where they actually have the hardware. Anything less than that, and we're gonna be spinning our wheels. We're gonna be here another 80 years and we still won't know what's going on. That's why Leonard Stringfield's information is so vital, because his cases contain the debris, the bodies, and the craft themselves. So everything's kind of wrapped up into one thing in a tight little bow. That's what we want. So what evidence I got? Okay, well, why don't we start with some historical cases. I want to hit you with a good example of what I would get from the QFOS archives. So this is a case, this is in 1983. Primary eyewitness was driving home. It's about 9:30 p.m. at night. It's near Mobile, Alabama. She's driving down the road and all of a sudden she hears this booming noise. Her whole car starts shaking. So she pulls off to the side of the road thinking the transmission fell out. She gets out of the car, looks under, everything seems fine, okay, gets back in the car. She drives another half mile down the road and off to the right, over this clearing in a field, she sees this craft. Now this thing measured about 276 feet in length. It was 80 feet tall. The whole thing, according to her, was fastened by rivets, and it had portholes throughout where she could look inside, because she was standing right below this thing. And she said that when she looked in these porthole windows, it reminded her of an East Coast shipping yard. It had crossbeam and girder construction inside. It had bulkheads inside. This top section had a wraparound window with what looked like 5'10" humanoid-looking beings, all wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. Now, on the second level, there was another wraparound window. Over to the midsection, there was a door closing from right to left. At the bottom of this craft, she said that there were two gondolas with the same 5'10" humanoid-looking beings. It was in like this antiseptically sterile environment. Like they didn't even notice that she was looking at them. Now, at the very bottom of the craft, there were hundreds of 24-inch by 24-inch highly polished mirror reflector devices that looked like mirrors. And this thing tapered toward the back. Here's our second rendering here, and you can see this door was closing from right to left, and she's watching this thing. She's seeing this. So this is APRO Bulletin. This is the original sketch that went with the report. This is the guide that we used. So we want to have the paperwork, we want to have the backup, we want to have the newspaper clippings to back all this up. I'm not going to even present anything unless I've got something to back it up with, because I know there's skeptical people out there. They want to see some evidence. So fast forward to about, I would say 2 years ago now. I get this text from this lady. I don't know who she is. She says, Mike, my name is Pat. I'm the witness that saw this. I've been trying to get a hold of you for 10 years. I can't believe it. It's the lady who actually saw this thing. She texted me. I couldn't believe it. So we had this ongoing discussion over 6 weeks, and she said, you know what, Mike? I kept my original sketches, and I want you to have them. She sent me her original sketches. I couldn't believe it. So we did another full color rendering, so it was a great case. Fantastic case. Looking at this for 30 years, to answer your question here, I personally believe that 95% of what people are reporting as extraterrestrial UFOs are in point of fact our own programs. And the way I come up with that number is just look what the witnesses are telling us. For instance, Hudson Valley Boomerang, 82 to 89. When these things flew over that area, we had 25,000 eyewitnesses over almost a 10-year time period. When they looked up, what did they see? Number one, in many cases, they heard a low-frequency electrical humming noise, like a transformer or a sewing machine. That's the first thing. Number two, these things had multicolored flashing lights. Like the reds would go off, then the blues would go off, then the greens would go off, then the whites would go off, and it would repeat the pattern. Stanton Friedman stated that lights on an ET spacecraft could only be for decoration. What do they need lights for? They don't need wings, they don't need lights, so that's another thing. And we've got evidence of tubes, pipes, and cylinders on the bottom of these things. We've got transparent panels where you can look up inside the superstructure, and what you see is a crossbeam and girder construction like a truss bridge. We've got bulkheads, we've got stringers. It's just got this mechanical understructure to it. So that checks out with the Hudson Valley Wave, that's 82 to 89. That checks out with the Belgium Triangle, that's 1989 to 1990, where multiple witnesses in Belgium saw these black triangles that made a low-frequency humming noise. They had pipes on the bottom of them. We had Belgium F-16s fly after these things. They could not catch them. And then if you hook that up with the January 5th, 2000 Southern Illinois Triangle case, that also had what quote-unquote looked like stacked Legos on the bottom of it, it's very clear now that they have made a breakthrough, a propulsion system breakthrough, and they're leaving all of us behind in a completely different world. There's a couple of lines of thought here. When you spend billions of dollars on black budget funding, which we can prove they've done, during the mid-1950s, they were quote-unquote desperately trying to crack the gravity barrier. I've got a whole binder full of all these newspaper clippings. Universities cracking the gravity barrier. Defense contractors working to control and harness gravity. Because, like, first of all, we had the electrical barrier, harnessing electricity. We did that. Then the next thing to harness was rocketry. So we've got that with the liquid rockets and the solid rockets. Then the next frontier to break was really the gravity barrier. Because if you can break the gravity barrier, you could control the world. So what the newspaper clippings are telling us is that multiple defense contractors like Martin Aerospace Company, the Sperry Rand Corporation, Bell Aircraft Corporation, all of these defense contractors were together desperately trying to crack the gravity barrier. Now, when you fund them with unlimited funding and billions of dollars, and according to Timothy Good, the whole subject of UFOs, quote, was classified higher than the atomic bomb, which is the cover of his book. It's called Above Top Secret. That's the classification of UFOs. They were classified higher than the atomic bomb during World War II. So we're really dealing with the varsity team here. Absolutely not. You cannot take down one of these vehicles with any type of missile system, guns, radar, AAA, anti-aircraft artillery. You can't. You have to get something that's instantaneous, because whatever these UFOs are, and we know what a lot of these things are, that they are tricksters, because they can materialize and dematerialize at will. They can fly into oceans at will. They can fly into the inside of mountains at will and have no impact. So in a lot of these cases, we're not talking about a physical craft. Now, when these things materialize and they're coming in from space-time, we're using these scalar weapons, which are actually faster than light, to target and track and shoot these things down. And then we're exploiting the technology. And this is all like the deepest black of the black, because when you talk about these classified programs, many of these programs were born black, they died black, and we'll never know anything about it. When you look at the newspaper clippings and you look at the periodicals that talk about tracking the black budget programs, they clearly state that in one example, during the Clinton administration, we were pouring $100 million a day on these black budget programs. Other things having to do with the Reagan buildup, where if you were a defense contractor and you had a new concept, you got funded. They wrote you a blank check and you got funded. And so we've got all these classified programs procured during the Reagan administration that have never seen the light of day. Now, what gets even more sinister is, sure, you've got the black budget. That's known. You can go to the Library of Congress, you as a taxpayer, and all of us should do this because it's our First Amendment right to question authority. So when you go to Edwards Air Force Base, or you go to Bowling Air Force Base, or you go to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, it is not the Air Force that owns these assets. They are nothing more than a temporary custodian of those assets. So that means is, we as taxpayers, we own the runways, and we own the aircraft, and we own the buildings, and we pay for everybody. So it's incumbent upon us to get an accounting of where our tax dollars are being spent. It's our job to do that. It's our job to question authority. So when you have these black budget funds, and then you've got things that are ultra black, or the WAVE programs, the quote unquote WAVE programs that go right through Congress. So these are the programs where the House and Senate Arms Services Committee, they're not briefed on it. So already we're outside the bounds of the Constitution here, because now we've got this classified black world going on here. The other thing is, where it gets a lot more sinister, where I don't even want to go down those roads, but we've got drug running, we've got illegal weapons, and we've got trafficking, human trafficking going on, also funding these programs. So when you bring that into the whole mix, now you're talking about illegal drugs going on, which is even more profitable than the oil cartels, and that's what's funding these programs. Let's move on to the next case. This is Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, late 1958. This is a USS FDR. So this is the first aircraft carrier to actually carry nuclear weapons on board. This thing had a history of UFO sightings. Primary eyewitness was in the Navy. His name is Chester Grzinski. He's no longer with us. This is a very famous case, actually. So all of a sudden, there's this commotion below decks on the aircraft carrier. All these people are trying to rush up to the flight deck. So you've got these naval personnel, you've got some screaming and yelling, and there's chaos. The guys are swearing they got to get up to the flight deck. When they got there, they saw this orange light approaching the aircraft carrier, and this was no orange light. As it got closer, this was a 200-foot long cigar-shaped craft. It had a series of square port windows. There were 25 naval personnel on the flight deck looking up at this thing, and they said that there was heat glimmering off this thing that they could feel on their faces. So it's a CE-1 because it's a visual sighting. It's a close encounter of the second kind because it had physical effects that they could feel on their skin. And they said, walking between these windows were these humanoid-looking beings about 3.5 to 4 feet tall with oversized head. In fact, one of them was looking back at the guys on the deck of the aircraft carrier, and he raised his hand over his head and was just waving to the guys. It sounds crazy. So here's the full color rendering that we did that gives you an idea of what this actually looks like. So you can imagine all the guys on the flight deck here. Here's the being waving back. I contacted this gentleman. We spoke for a little bit. I've got his original report. This is his original sketch, and you can have certainly got good scans of this as well. And here you can see this being, this is going to be hard to see, but he's waving back to the naval personnel. And this is late 1958, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And this aircraft carrier had a history of UFO sightings. It wasn't just an isolated incident. There's more going on here. And I want to give you the details on this because this is important, because this is a Project Blue Book, official Air Force Project Blue Book case, March 23rd, 1966. This has to do with an electronics instructor at Sheppard Air Force Base. He's driving down the road. It's in the morning, about 5:03 in the morning. He's got his headlights on, across the horizon. It's getting a little bit light out. He's just having his leisurely drive, and all of a sudden, he sees something parked perpendicular to the road. So he slams on his brakes. He gets out of the vehicle. What does he see? He sees this craft. It's about 75 feet in length, 8 feet tall. It looks like an overturned bowling pin. It's also described as a fish or a perch-like looking craft. On the forward section of it, it had what looked like a transparent bubble canopy that was ripped off from a World War II B-26. That's what it looked like. The whole thing was propped up off the pavement by these 3-foot tall, what looked like lunar landing gear legs. There were 2 beaming spotlights shining forward, 2 beaming spotlights shining vertically downward. He said on the right side of the craft, there was a man, not an alien, not an extraterrestrial. There was a man there. He was wearing 2-piece green fatigues with a baseball cap with the bill turned up. He was shining a flashlight toward the bottom of what looked like an air stair door, which was open. Directly in back of that air stair door, there was a 3.5-foot diameter porthole window that was divided into 4 equal pie segments. Directly above that porthole window that you see on the right side here was this very interesting stinger or spire that swept back toward the trailing edge of the craft that terminated in about an 8-inch diameter sphere. In back of the porthole window, written on the right-hand side of the craft, were the letters written in black, vertically, TL4768, written on the side of the craft. At the very end of the craft were very small flight controls. Now, when whoever this was, military guy, noticed he was being watched by Eddie Laxton, he scurried up this air stair, he closed the door. Then there was a high-pitched drilling noise. I've got 12 cases of this now, this high-pitched drilling noise. The whole craft levitates off the ground, sits there for 30 seconds, then departs like a spark on a grinding wheel. This is back in 1966. This is prior to Apollo 11 landing with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin at Tranquility Base July 20th, 1969. We already had the technology to make liquid rockets obsolete and solid rockets obsolete. And then we can go to January 28th, 1986, where the Challenger astronauts were essentially killed, including school teacher Krista McAuliffe. So my question is, was Neil Armstrong briefed on this technology? Was Krista McAuliffe talked about this technology, which would have done away with the liquid rockets, and she'd still be here today if we were having this technology? They weren't briefed on it. So let's go to his drawing here. You can see this is his original drawing. You've got the air stair door, you've got the spotlights, you've got the B-26 canopy. Here's that spire that terminates with the sphere. Now, if you take a look at the dimensions from Eddie Laxton here, this is 8 feet and this is 75 feet. If this is true, then this drawing is out of scale. This thing should be stretched much longer off the page. Now, I can see what he did here. He didn't have a lot of room on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, so he kind of foreshortened this thing, and he made it much smaller so they could fit it on the page. What it actually looks like is this drawing that I put together here. Now, he also said that if he saw this guy later that afternoon, he would recognize him. That's how close Eddie was to this gentleman here. He also mentioned that on the shoulder of this man with the flashlight, it had what looked like naval ranking insignias, like chevrons. So this is another indicator of a man-made technology. Now, I've got the newspaper clipping here. This is the Daily Oklahoman, March 1st, 1971. Object sighting now rude. And this is Eddie Laxton right here. This is the man of the hour. That's the actual photograph. You can see the drawing here that they've done. Interesting drawing. It's well done. Now, this is Eddie Laxton talking here. Quote, "What I saw was definitely not from space. The man was wearing fatigues and had a cap with the bill broken up, like Air Force mechanics wear," Laxton said. It had common English letters on it. So this is just a very clear indicator that we're not dealing with an alien technology, we're not dealing with an extraterrestrial technology, we're dealing with good old-fashioned American engineering. We've already talked about the newspaper clippings, 1955. We know the date here, this is March 23rd, 1966, so they had a good 10 years to develop the technology, and they've done it. They've absolutely done it, and what we're looking at here are 2 parallel programs. You've got basically our public space program in the form of NASA with these liquid rockets and solid rockets. And then we've got a much more deep black program, defense contractor, Atomic Energy Commission, Navy space program, secret space program that has no congressional oversight, that has no public scrutiny, that are flying craft that basically have the form, fit, and function of what appear to be ET technology, but it's our own man-made technology. What we really need is the bodies, the debris, and the craft, and the physical hardware. That will be the vehicle that facilitates disclosure. So that's why these crash retrieval cases are the most important, because these are the people who dealt with the pathologist report. These are the people who did the autopsies with the bodies when they were brought in from the crash site. These are the personnel who manhandled craft up onto the back of 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy trucks and shipped them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Edwards North Base Complex, MacDill Air Force Base, Tampa, Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, Eglin Air Force Base. So they've diversified their portfolio. And so that is the heart of where all of this is leading. It's our history. We paid for these programs with our own tax dollars, and you can see what's happened now is over the decades, this subject of UFO crash retrievals is no longer classified. It's no longer classified. What it is, it's proprietary. So this has been shifted over to the defense contractors, the military industrial complex, and what they did long ago is they cut a dirty deal. The government cut a dirty deal with these defense contractors, and they said, we've got some things here, we want you to investigate it, we're not quite sure what it is, because the government doesn't do anything. It farms out things to over-the-shelf contractors, that's what they do. So they went to the contractors and they said, I don't care what you have to do. You can profit from this, you can trickle down technology, you can make billions on it, I don't care. You can commercialize it, we don't care. All we want to know are two things. Number one, what is the propulsion system of these UFOs that we've retrieved? What is the advanced energy system associated with the weapons applications that we can gain from this, and we want to exploit the technology. So that's really all they wanted to know is how do these things run and how can we exploit the technology for weapons advancement? And that's what they've been doing over the last 80 years. And they're using our tax dollars in classified black budget fundings in underground facilities all over the United States. And you know that the government isn't going to have a single point failure. They're going to diversify their portfolio all around the country. So they've spread out their assets. They've got craft at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They've got other things at MacDill Air Force Base. They've got things at Edwards North Base Complex. They've got things at Eglin Air Force Base. They absolutely have a craft at headquarters, McLean, Virginia of the CIA. So they have diversified their portfolio. They're never going to put all their eggs in one basket, because if there's a fire, if there's an earthquake, they run the risk of losing these assets. And so that's what they've done. They populated these things around the country. They brought in professionals, defense contractors, linguistic experts, and it's a transnational program. Well, the purpose is to honor the legacy of Leonard Stringfield, who deserves a lot more credit than he ever got. He's kind of the unsung hero in ufology. He's been gone for so long now, he's completely forgotten about. No one even knows who this guy is, but we all owe him a debt of gratitude, because you can see the narrative on UFOs is always being pushed toward the crash retrievals. That's what you're hearing about. The giggle factor is still there. It's being lowered, but in these congressional hearings, they're talking about biologics, they're talking about hardware, and that all goes back to the crash retrievals. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take the absolute trailblazing pioneering work done by Leonard Stringfield with limited budget. I mean, this is not a guy who had millions at his disposal like the government does. There was no cell phones, no internet back then. He was tracking these people down in the late 50s. So credit has to go with him. All I want to do is make his original first-hand military cases preserve an important part of our national history through drawings, through illustrations, make the cases come alive. That's my goal.